WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been arbitrarily detained by Sweden and the United Kingdom since his arrest in London on 7 December 2010 as a result of the legal action taken against him by both governments. The expert panel called on the Swedish and British authorities to end Mr. Assange's deprivation of liberty. I think the recommendation is quite clear. Respect his physical integrity and freedom of movement, and afford him the right to compensation.
Okay, well, that was Christophe Pouchot at the very top, exactly 6 years ago today, from the UN Committee on Arbitrary Detention, etc., making that speech 6 years ago today. And here we go 6 years later, and Julian is still being arbitrarily detained, but this time in a prison. Back then it was inside the Ecuadorian embassy. By the way, I'm Randy Critical. This is Randy Critical Live on the Fly here on both WBAI 99.5 FM in New York City and Progressive Network. And here on Assange Countdown to Freedom. It's a very special episode today because I have a tremendous crew with me. I have the great Daniel Ellsberg. I'm not going to give you all like your full credits. Daniel Ellsberg, a heroic whistleblower. Marianne Williamson, who I know is very good friends with Daniel. He's been on her show, the Marianne Williamson show podcast. She's a presidential candidate in 2020. Had a great idea. It was called a Department of Peace. And we'll talk about that later. Roger Waters, everybody knows, a music icon, activist extraordinaire, the father of Julian Assange, John Shipton, joining us from Sydney, Australia, and the host of Going Underground, really one of the greatest investigative journalists around today, with the best show on TV called Going Underground, and that's Afshin Rattansi. And I'm going to go to you first, Afshin. You're in London. You covered the events today. People are spiking the ball. Do you want to give us an overview of what happened today in London in that courtroom with that High Court?
Well, I mean, I better say what a privilege to be around all these people. I think three of them have been on Ongoing Underground. Not Marianne. We haven't been able to get her. And I haven't seen Dan for a long time. I know there have been some level of optimism because of this tiny little shard of light shone today, allowing Julian Assange not to appeal on any kind of basis that what he was doing was journalism, that what he was doing was in a sense what Dan allowed to happen as regards revealing to the world the Vietnam War. No, all it was a point of law about whether the United States of America, and I have it here, the United States of America versus one man, Julian Assange. It's dated wrongly. One point of law that should the US be allowed to give assurances that he won't be basically killed in US custody. Not about what he did, not about the ridiculous 18 counts under the Espionage Act under which he's charged, saying things like, oh, Julian Assange shouldn't have revealed things about Guantanamo. He's not a U.S. citizen. I mean, if one looks at the original indictment, it's so bizarre. So this is lawfare. And I think as many of the other guests have said in the past, every journalist, every person needs to help save his life, like all those lives that we can't save because of the events that he revealed to the world, all around the world, in every country in the world. And were kept secret from us all.
Well, before I go to Marianne, because I think she might be able to identify with Stella Morris being a mother and all of that, being separated. Let's play this speech by Stella Morris this morning in London right after the decision came down, if that is set up there, Kelly?
What happened in court today is precisely what we wanted to happen. The High Court certified that we had raised point of law of general public importance, and that the Supreme Court has good grounds to hear this appeal. The situation now is that the Supreme Court has to decide whether it will hear the appeal. But make no mistake, we won today in court. But let's not forget that every time we win, as long as this case isn't dropped, as long as Julian isn't freed, Julian continues to suffer. For almost 3 years, he's been in Belmarsh prison, and he is suffering profoundly, day after day, week after week, year after year. Julian has to be freed, and we hope that this will soon end. But we are far from achieving justice in this case because Julian has been incarcerated for so long, and he should not have spent a single day in prison. If there had been justice, the officials who plotted, who conspired to murder Julian would be in the courtroom right now. If there were justice, the crimes that Julian exposed, war crimes, the killing of innocent civilians, would not be impugned. Our fight goes on, and we will fight this until Julian is free.
Well, that was a powerful morning. Marion, you interviewed her a few weeks back when you had that incredible show with lasted about 4 or 5 hours. What do you make of that speech this morning, and Stella Morris's determination?
Stella is a very morally compelling voice on behalf of Julian, as is John, his father, as is Gabriel, his brother, as is the statement made by his mother. And I think that that's important because it humanizes the story and makes us all remember there's one man here being treated cruelly, being wrongly prosecuted and wrongly persecuted. And also, Stella is one of his lawyers. That's how she originally met him. So she's also speaking as a lawyer. So when John or Gabriel or Stella speak, this is the leader telling us. And it was important when she told us this morning, as has already been stated, it was a small victory, but it is a victory. And I think it's important for all of us so that we will continue, so that we will persevere. You know, so much of politics is not just the law, but the perception. And I think every time we have a program like this, every time any of us speak about this, whether it's Stella and John Gabriel or any of the rest of us, we are helping to educate the public on what this is really about. You know, these days there is just so much cacophony. There is so much meaningless preoccupation that just fills the air that sometimes you have to curate the public's attention. How important this is, that this is not just about the man Julian. This is about freedom of the press. This is not just about cruelty towards him. It's about the cruelty involved in war crimes. It's about atrocities. It's about collateral murders. It's about government cover-up of military malfeasance. It's about the misuse of the classification system. And it's about a man who bravely stood up, who did expose these things, who is now being punished for exposing the real crimes when the criminals themselves are the ones who are trying to punish him. So Stella is important. I think all of us in our way doing what we can, the larger field of public conversation is important so that ultimately the message will be strong enough, loud enough, and significant enough that Merrick Garland will hear it, that Joe Biden will hear it, and they will stop this farce.
Well, well said. John Shipton, I know you have been out there for the past 3 or 4 years. We've done events together. You're just like your son, like Stella, indefatigable, and you keep going. What was your assessment? How did you feel after you heard what I think are glad tidings this morning? Although a major victory.
Oh, thanks, Randy. Hello, everybody. Well, you know, I just count up the things. Like, I think Julian has now appeared before 17 judges in the United Kingdom. There's only 12 in the Supreme Court. But this carnival, what do you call it? This carousel
Yes.
of oppression, it's this circus of one after the other of these judges going through what in June is called the forms. The forms must be followed. It's grown into a monstrous, quivering, collapsing, almost collapsing. It's like a house of cards, if you like. And it's just held up only by the fact that people in the British justice system have to come to work. That's all that holds it up. They come to work. The rest of it, as you can see before your eyes, is a monstrous farce of oppression and the following a form in order to justify a wrong, to justify a series of crimes, to justify the persecution of Julian Assange over 13 years, to justify the expense that we all go to in fighting this battle. Forms that simply are used to justify the actions of a persecution which has no value whatsoever to anybody anywhere in the world. It only is a form that's followed by people who have to go to work and sign off on a piece of paper. It's really crushing. Yeah.
Roger, we spoke earlier today when this decision came out, and you weren't spiking the ball. We know that this is a merry-go-round, or it's a Ferris wheel, that just it moves, but it doesn't go anywhere. Here he is back going before a court to see if he can appeal what they just said no to. I mean, it's like, this is beyond Kafkaesque, isn't it to you?
Yeah, well, it's very like Joseph K's predicament in a way, because on the first page of the trial, he wakes up and he's been accused of a crime and he has no idea what it is, and he's in prison and he's no idea why he's there. And a lot of the rest of the novel is actually him trying to discover what it is that he's done. Now, the interesting thing about this, and in listening to John talk about it and about the carousel and the blah and all of that, which is all perfectly true, is why? What is the purpose of it? And the purpose, it seems to be self-fulfilling, the purpose. So who John just said nobody gains anything out of this. Well, that's not really true.
Oh.
What they gain is obfuscation. The ruling class gains obfuscation of the fact that they commit war crimes to make a few quid and to stay in power. I mean, what other reason could anybody have for murdering those two Reuters journalists in Baghdad on May the 10th, 2007, or whatever the date was? I'm probably right, because it's probably drilled into my head when it actually was. Why would anybody want to obfuscate that and hide it and pretend that it didn't happen? You have to be abnormal in some way, in human terms, to see the collateral video that Chelsea Manning, who probably did commit some crime under American law, unlike Julian, who committed no crime, because she released that information to publishers, many of them. Julian was only one. She also released them to the New York Times and to the Washington Post and to the Guardian newspaper in England, among others, and to me, although I'm not a journalist, because that video was in every single show I did all over the world for the 3 years between 2010 and 2013, when I was traveling with my theatrical piece, The Wall. So I know this is going round in a big circle, but the point is, why cannot they confront the fact that they collectively committed these hideous war crimes?
Well, we got a
That-
little
that-
thing here.
all right, I hadn't finished.
You
but go
mentioned
on.
it. I just want to say we got to what you're talking about set up. The war crime you're talking about. I think we have a 30-second clip of it. You can go on, and then we're going to talk to Daniel about it. But you just want to play that while you're talking about it, Roger. This is a little pastiche of that collateral damage video, collateral murder damage.
Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260s.
Come on, fire. Hey, Roger. Keep shooting. Keep shooting.
Bushmaster 2-6, Bushmaster 2-6. We need to move time now.
All right, we just engaged all 8 individuals. Yeah, we got 2 bursts. We're still firing. Roger. Got him.
6 is a 2-6. We'll move, but we got
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I was on.
bypass.
God damn it, Kyle. Sorry. I hit him by head.
Okay, that's just a little part. Now, that makes it's ghastly to see that. And so, Roger, you're talking about that. They don't want that out there. That is what angered the DOD and the State Department, I suppose. And there are other reasons. I mean, go ahead, Daniel. Is that enough to infuriate the government to want to keep you in this situation as they have?
I don't know if fury is the right word. I think Roger's question that he raised there answers itself. Why would criminals not want on television dramatic evidence of their own murderous crimes? That does answer itself, doesn't it, Roger? Let's take that as a rhetorical question.
Well, clearly,
What? Fair
clearly,
enough?
you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So what I would like to focus on, though, today is there is one man, or you could say 2 men, who are keeping Julian in this torturous isolation, as he's been in for years, isolation amounting, as 2 rapporteurs for torture to the UN have pronounced, is prolonged isolation, which is mental and psychological torture. Now, of course, he's not the only one in the world or this country who is suffering that. Our prisons are filled with people who are getting prolonged isolation and are being tortured. Absolutely. But there is somebody in this case who could have stopped that and should have stopped that 1 year ago this week, and that is Joe Biden. President Biden could have dropped the extradition hearings and absolutely dropped the appeal for extradition. He could have done that even without doing what he actually further should have done, which is to drop the indictment and to drop this unconstitutional, clearly unconstitutional, at least clear to earlier Supreme Courts in my day, I think, prosecution of a journalist who is more protected by the First Amendment freedom of the press than I was as a source, or Chelsea Manning at that point. Even Obama, who prosecuted 3 times as many people for putting out classified information as all of his predecessors put together. Sorry about this sun on my face here, can't do anything about it. He prosecuted 3 times as many. I was the first to be prosecuted under Nixon, 8 or 9 under Obama. Even he did not indict any journalists. And he didn't indict Julian Assange for acts which he's now charged with, which were in 2010 under that Trump did indict for, but Obama earlier had forsworn after long consideration of indicting, possibly if they could find grounds for indicting a journalist on this, or somehow define him as not a journalist. He and Holder, I guess his attorney general, decided against it and did not. They didn't drop the case as they should have. They left it pending, but they did not indict. And I mean, they didn't let him go totally, but they didn't indict. Trump indicts him. And of course, that's like Guantanamo. The world is a law-free zone as far as the Trump administration is concerned. Biden should have remedied that on his first day in office. Stroke of the pen. End that extradition appeal. Instead, a holdover from the Trump administration, still in the Department of Justice, renewed the extradition. Okay, it's a while before Garland can put his own people in there. He's had about a year now. And of course, they should have dropped that extradition, and they should drop the indictment. That's all he has to do. He hasn't done it. So when it comes to what can Americans do to affect this, they can't affect the UK Supreme Court or the High Court particularly, that I can imagine. But they can tell their Congress representatives to tell the Attorney General and to tell the President that this is absolutely unconstitutional, an assault on the First Amendment. And if he is successfully brought over here and in this attitude now convicted, and if that is upheld by this Supreme Court, the First Amendment, freedom of the press, as far as, quote, national security information is concerned, nearly all of which is classified to save officials from, they say, embarrassment or culpability. Now, actually, they don't expect to be held accountable, as we're all saying, we're all agreeing here. Yes, of course, they should be indicted, but that hasn't ever happened, and it's not going to happen. But in terms of their saying, they have already chilled sources and chilled the process of freedom of the press with respect to the Defense Department, the State Department, the White House, the CIA, the NSA, all of those chilled it just by this indictment. Whatever happens, even if the extradition is dropped, every journalist now knows he could be in the crosshairs, even under a Democratic and relatively liberal president. So it's already chilling. But if he is convicted and that's upheld, cross off the First Amendment when it comes to protecting us from secret crimes of our government.
Okay, that's Daniel Ellsberg. I'm Randy Critical live on the fly here on WBA, Progressive Radio Network. Assange Countdown to Freedom Special Edition with Daniel Ellsberg, Marianne Williamson, Roger Waters, John Shifton, and my buddy Afshin Lattanzi. Originally, this show was just going to be you, but what happened today, we switched it and brought other people in. Afshin, I'm going to flip it over to you since you've interviewed several of these people to ask questions that you would ask.
Well, I was just thinking about what I actually quite like the way Dan assumes that where I'm speaking to you all from is just an air carrier. Boris Johnson is some sort of admiral on a U.S. aircraft carrier because it's all up to Garner to do this. I think it is important that if it is just elites that work out whether the First Amendment applies or not to the people at large, whether they do or not, the people around Biden, we must realize many journalists were killed under Obama if they weren't indicted. He did destroy Africa's richest per capita country, Libya, leading to untold catastrophe on the Mediterranean over here. And Tony Blinken, of course, a big supporter of that invasion of Libya. The people around Biden are very much not the kind of people that I think would love, I think they call it what? A striptease of national security. They wouldn't want the public at large, presumably, to know. And of course, we've got to remember that a key part in this 18 counts of Espionage Act violation alleged, or whether it matters or not, whether it is or not, is the fact that the revelations that showed and led to resignations of the Democratic National Congress, showing that the Bernie Sanders campaign was effectively destroyed by the DNC. And arguably one could say Assange revealed why Trump was elected, because Hillary Clinton couldn't win. So there are all those, if we're going to go down the elite political route, as opposed to what Roger was talking about, the class route, which of course is the people, and direct action must be forced like it did at the time of the writing of the Constitution to fight for one's rights. If it is about elite class politics, I don't think we should have any ability to be optimistic about Joe Biden.
Right. Well, who is? We were outside, Marianne and I, the other day in 20-degree weather in front of the Department of Justice. Marianne, is that what you see as what the path we have to take going forward, direct action like what we engaged in the other day in front of the Department of Justice to try to do?
Well, yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
We have to do everything possible. We have to do that. We have to be on our social media. We have to be calling and writing, as Daniel said, our congresspeople, our senators. We just have to be making noise in whatever way we can. And yes, as Afshan said, and as Daniel said, keeping in mind and keeping in the public's understanding that Joe Biden could end this tonight. Merrick Garland could end this tonight. You know, the president is extremely unpopular right now. And somebody in the White House, somebody must be getting the message that no matter how many hacks they put on television to say that the problem is with us rather than with them, certainly his lack of popularity as we move towards the midterms is making somebody think, what could we do? What could we do to make people think we're not as bad as in fact we apparently are at the moment? And my hope is that freeing Assange might be one of the things that they would consider worthwhile, like this is an inconvenience. This is what we need to become. We need to be an inconvenience to those who most need to be inconvenienced. And every time we have these conversations, every time we make it clear to people what happened here, the people were murdered unnecessarily. There's never necessary murder, but against all ethical rules of engagement military wise. That when you explain to people that the classification system was never meant to be something that the military or the government could use just to hide whatever they don't want people to know, that in fact there has to be a reason why something is classified, people do understand. And, you know, when I was younger, and was Daniel Ellsberg is he was such a pivotal character. During the Vietnam War, when the My Lai massacre occurred, the consciousness of the country was such that there was great national shame. People understood that we're supposed to be ashamed as a nation and at least try to make it right when we do something wrong. And that's what we have to get through to people. The American government has done something wrong here. The US military did something wrong here, and they're not going to fix it. And as long as the American people are distracted, as long as the American people aren't holding them to account, nothing will change. It took an Australian, because the US press has become basically just stenographers who just go, their idea of reporting, foreign policy reportage, is to actually go over to the Pentagon, take whatever the Pentagon spokesman says, write it down, and give it to us as news. This is not journalism. Journalism is the bravery of people like Daniel Ellsberg and people like Julian Assange. You know, when Joe Scarborough said, this isn't the Pentagon Papers, well, Daniel Ellsberg says it is. So when you ask me, what do we need to do? We need to do all of the above. But I totally agree with Daniel Ellsberg and with Afshan that we have to keep that name, Joe Biden, front and center. President Biden, stop this now. That needs to be our communication as citizens.
All right, I'm Randy Credico. We are coming, by the way, live in D.C. Here where we had a comedy show the other night, stand-ups for Assange, here at the wonderful Tabard Inn, famous Tabard Inn, where I had lunch with your son, John Shipton, just a few months back, Gabriel. What is your feeling right now? I mean, your son is so far away. I know you speak to him all the time, but what does it do viscerally to you to see him go through this process? How do you deal with it?
Well, not the best. Is it too much to expect somebody in these positions of power administering this prosecution to be decent, to be upright, to be decisive upon the law? Is that too much to expect in this gigantic carousel of prosecution? Is it too much to expect somebody in Merrick Garland's office to say, well, this doesn't look the best. We're not acting here in the service of justice, which is what we are sworn to do? Isn't it too much to ask the Australian government to just simply ring up, as they do constantly, ring up Mr. Biden or the White House and say, well, this is not a good thing to be seen to be doing? Is it too much to expect somebody in the English government or the United Kingdom government to say that we're looking shabby, we're looking enfouled with political considerations, we're looking draped with deals, draped with considerations. We're looking something that when the tide goes out is left after a storm. That's how the United Kingdom's justice system appears. Is it too much for any of us to simply say, is there somebody in these organisations who can act decently, can be upright and serve justice and bring this end-foul persecution to a complete stop?
Right.
This is what I ask.
Before I go to you, Roger, I want you to comment on this because you are an activist. You're out there on the street. Daniel, you've been on the street. I know you have, Mr. Shipton and Marion just the other day. Julian also not only is a journalist, but he's an activist as well. And we have a speech of his from 2010 there in London and an anti-war rally. This was such a beautiful speech. It was cogent and compelling. And I want to just show what we're missing right now. Who is ensconced in that dank prison? Do we have that, Kelly?
The Vietnam War and the push for US involvement was a result of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. A lie. The Iraq War famously is a result of lies. Wars in Somalia are a result of lies. The Second World War and the German invasion of Poland was a result of carefully constructed lies. That is war by media. Let us ask ourselves, of the complicit media, which is the majority of the mainstream press, what is the average death count attributed to each journalist?
Roger, you look at that, you see right there, very active, very articulate, very emotional and committed. When you look at that, what do you how do you feel that he's inside? What goes through your mind that he's inside Belmore's in a dungeon? That character.
Well, I've seen that 100 times, obviously, like we all have. It's at the beginning and end of every program that we ever watch about Julian Assange, and I love it, and I'm very good. But I've seen it so often that I want to answer what John was asking. He was asking a really important question, and I think I know the answer. He was asking, is it too much to expect somebody today walking in a corridor of power, in a position of power in one of our governments, to respond to all the things that any one of those people could learn by watching us today on this program or listening to Julian making that speech there? And while he was speaking, I was going, yeah, it is too much. And then I thought, well, hold on a minute. Of course it's not too much to expect. It's what any normal, ordinary human being with a measure of heart and empathy in their heart would expect from any other normal human being with a capacity for empathy. But sadly, people walking in the corridors of power are normally extremely deficient in the area of empathy and in the area to be able to recognize what is important to all of us as human beings in terms of our rights. So it is rare. And two names pop into my head immediately when I think of that and John's question. Robin Cook, who resigned in the House of Parliament on the invasion of Iraq. He had the grace to go, this is bullshit. And he resigned from the government, from Tony Blair's government. So he's one name. And the other name, and this may be going off on a weird tangent, but it's really important to this conversation. And I bet Julian would agree it's really important to this conversation, okay, is Kai Achim Schönbach. And he was a man who was in the news yesterday because he was a rear admiral was a rear admiral in the German Navy, okay, who on a panel like this, talking to somebody or other, described the stories in the Western media, millions of them, they're absolutely everywhere, saying that the Russians are planning to invade Ukraine, as absolute nonsense. He said that on Wednesday, and on Thursday he was required to resign, or he said it on Friday and on Saturday. So he's resigned, he's gone, he's no longer part of the team, simply because he told that self-evident truth that anybody with half a brain watching any of the news knows is nonsense, and it's the story that's being generated and generated, and when none of us are quite sure why, but somebody will have figured it out. So is it reasonable, John, to expect there to be somebody like Kai Achim Schönbach or Robin Cook somewhere in one of the governments that represents we the people? No. Of course we should expect that. Are we likely to find one? No, we're not. Because they are not governed by the things that govern us and by our capacity for love and empathy for our fellow human beings. So that when we see Nadia and Saeed being cut to fucking ribbons with 30mm machine gun fire in Iraq on May the 10th, 2007, we go, they don't go, that's not their response. Their response is, oh, how can we cover this up? Whoa. Yeah. Cut him off for a start, and they slowly, one by one, will cut us all off. And this is why this is an existential threat, as I always try and make that point when I'm on a panel like this, or if I get a chance to speak. That's why this is an existential threat to every human being on Earth. And the sad thing is that most of the human beings on Earth don't recognize that. They don't recognize it. They don't realize this isn't about Julian. It's about all of you. It's about every single one of you. This is taking away the freedom of every human being on Earth. And it extrapolates from the fact, obviously, that Julian Assange was a publisher. And we need publishers. We need people to tell us the truth. Otherwise, they're going to go on murdering us. And not just us, foreign people in foreign land, not just Christians, Muslims and Jews and all sorts of people all over the world, with impunity. Because when they are found doing it, we don't rise up as a people and go, nada más. No, you cannot murder children and men and women with impunity. In our name, in my name. It's in my name that Tony Blair went and invaded Iraq with George W. Bush. We won't have it. So here we are, 6 of us. I feel like we're sitting in a cell somewhere, you know, in some small town in France, in the middle of occupied France, in the middle of the Second World War, desperate that the Gestapo won't find us because they'll kill us immediately that they find us. And this isn't quite so immediate, but this, the killing of Julian Assange, is the Gestapo finding somebody who is a threat to their errant authority and their desire to be able to rule the world and steal everything from everyone in the world by killing anyone that they want with impunity and by exercising their will through the power of arms. And that is what the United States government does not want spread around. And that is why Joe Biden won't immediately tomorrow morning. I agree with Daniel. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could write to our congressmen and women and get them to persuade Joe Biden to drop the charge? I mean, Joe Biden, don't get anybody in the world started on Joe Biden. How could you have this wreck of a man as the president of the most powerful country in the world? He can hardly stand up. It's a wonder he doesn't drop his cup of tea, never mind anything else. Sorry, I shouldn't. I mean, I don't mean to attack Biden personally, but obviously it's extremely unkind that they're using him as their puppet for all of this.
All right, let me ask.
Clearing his throat.
All right.
I like.
Well, go ahead, Daniel. You take a look at this. Is it as grave? Is it as an existential threat to this democracy, to the First Amendment, as Roger had just laid out? To you?
Yes, it is. I have to. I am sorry that the situation is such that I think I would have to agree with every word of that passionate speech we just heard from Roger Waters. It would, by many people, be said, well, it must be extreme, it must be overstated. Actually, it isn't. And the risk that our leaders, on the one hand, for 70 years now, or if you like, 60, 50 years, no less than 50 years, the risk they've taken with destroying not all life on Earth, but near extinction of the human species. We've now known for 30 years since the nuclear winter was revealed in 1983. 1983, almost 40 years ago. For that time, the Pentagon has known, or could have known, that there are actual existing war plans approved by the president if carried out under any circumstances, preemptive, retaliatory, preventive, whatever, would actually cause the reduction in sunlight reaching the Earth by fires and smoke being propelled up into the stratosphere where it won't rain out, would not result in extinction, but 90% or 98%, according to Alan Roebuck and Brian Toon, the environmental scientists that I've spoken with. So life goes on for some humans. Look, 1% is what? 70 million people, 78 million people. Oh, that's a lot. You can have a real civilization for that. And you can do it all again, actually, with the technology that will remain. Wonderful. I'm not quite that interested in this prolonging that species that has done that to every other large animal, because they will not be adaptive in the way that we are, and they will go extinct. And that's what we're preparing to do, paying to do, planning to do, threaten, risk, all of that. So a sad aspect of this is, when I was younger, a lot younger, I thought if the people only knew, they wouldn't let this happen. I'm sorry at 90, but I can't sustain that feeling anymore. Because when they do know, not much happens. And, a lot of that is defects of democracy and lack of democracy and whatever. And a lot of it is other priorities that aren't that different from the people in power. Of course, they have to keep their jobs. They have to put food on the table, absolutely, take care of their children. Yes, but all of this is threatened by what we're preparing. We're about to build 400 new ICBMs. Northrop Grumman has the contract now. $13 billion is the very beginning, going toward $240 billion over the next 3 years, $100 billion in the next 10 years for ICBMs that have been a dangerous anachronism for over half a century. They're totally vulnerable and will be the hair trigger for the war when it occurs. So they shouldn't exist. But they're jobs, it's profits, it's donations to campaigns. And I'm part of a campaign to eliminate the ICBM, not because, to come back to John's word, John Simmons, not because I expect them to eliminate ICBMs in my lifetime. They're too profitable. There are too many jobs, etc. So when you use the word expect, it has several meanings. And if you really mean predict, can't we? Is it too much to predict, or to expect in that sense that people will tell the truth and that the public will respond? And as Roger said, well, yes, in that sense, it is too much. We now know it doesn't happen. Is it too much to demand to try to achieve this, to try to put this word out and give some chance that eventually this truth will somehow have an effect? A friend of mine said, Fred Brantford, some of you may know him, revealed our bombing in Laos, our destruction of the Plain of Jars. He wrote a book with that title. And he was trying to work on climate, and he thought, if I just persuade people, this was 20 years ago, that their grandchildren, not their great-grandchildren, but their grandchildren are at stake. Well, now, of course, it's our children, it's ourselves right now. That was a while ago. But he said, don't they care, these rich people, these CEOs of Exxon, for example, who's doing it, all of them, as much as they can with Biden this year to extract as much oil as they can make, and get it from new places and new reserves and whatnot, put it up into the atmosphere. Don't they care about their grandchildren? And here's where I would make a little distinction from Roger. They do care about their grandchildren. They just don't care about your grandchildren. And they figure their grandchildren will do all right when the climate changes. There will still be luxury resorts. They won't be in the same place. They won't be in Caribbean. They'll be in Antarctica or somewhere. But they'll do all right in their bubbles, like the ones that Peter Thiel is building bunkers in New Zealand. We won't be it right, and they don't care about us. And that's the truth. And unfortunately, it's too easy to get other humans, ordinary humans, to buy into the us versus them, where them, the others, are defined by our leaders and by our demagogues and by our media and everybody. The people who don't matter, who don't care, that we can eliminate, we can exterminate without concern. In other words, my only distinction from Rogers is I think most humans do have a we and us that they care about. But unfortunately, it isn't only the leaders that can define most of the world as other. That doesn't really matter. And remember, on climate, the people who are going to go first are Bangladesh and islands in the Pacific. Well, the world can do without them, right? And the rest of it, we have lots of time to prepare, for a minority to keep at it. Well, anyway, does this fit in with Julian? Yes, because I would say no climate scientist in the government. Remember, James Hansen first brought the climate out in, I think it was 1988. That's, 34 years ago. And he had to resign from NASA because he was being muzzled, because they didn't want that out. And that's over a succession of presidents. And so, well, how many others are in there right now who could be telling us, joining the scientists in saying, this is an emergency, what Greta Thunberg has been telling the youth of the world for years now. It's an emergency. It's a crisis. Begin acting like it is. We aren't. It's not happening yet. But we're working. There are individuals. We're not alone. There's people who are doing their best to warn and to alert and to avert and postpone these catastrophes.
I agree with that. All right. So I got to keep this moving. We're going to get back to Julian, the situation in London. I want to go back to you, Afshin. You've interviewed him several times, I think, like more than anybody, more than several times. I want people to know what kind of individual that you have gotten to know over the last 10 years as a journalist and as a human being. If you could just give us the human side and the journalistic side of Julian for those who don't know.
Yeah, because we miss him so much. I've got to say though that when Dan appears to be agreeing kind of with Roger, the world is probably doomed. I mean, I agree with both of them, but we often, any journalist obviously looks up to Dan as
Yes.
some optimism, as kind of Marianne was saying. I don't know whether you all heard John Kirby, Biden's Pentagon press spokesperson, speaking in the past hour, talking about, we should have seen the journalists asking questions of 8,200 troops being prepared in readiness for war with Russia in Europe. And of course, we would want someone like Julian Assange in that press corps at the Pentagon to ask questions, even if the simplest one for those stenographers to power at the Pentagon just now would have been, what are these troops going to do in Europe, and how is this going to help peace in any sense of the word? We miss Julian so much because he's been so silenced. You'll forget, and people can watch some of the interviews online, but the range that he had, the intellectual depth and range that he had to be able to see situations, because you've got to realize WikiLeaks threatened elites and governments not just in the United States, but also in China, in Russia, and of course, right across the global south. Any people in governance doing wrong things, and Assange is so quick to be able to analyze geopolitically, geostrategically, as well as on the minutiae of the levels of corruption within governments around the world. And that's what we miss so much because, I mean, as Marianne said, there are stenographers. The readout from the State Department or the Pentagon is distributed to the offices of state in NATO countries. And they literally just read out, Putin is going to invade Ukraine imminently. Boris Johnson said there's going to be blood, Russian blood soon. I mean, all this talk is generated from cable statements issued by the State Department, but behind all of that, there's all this secret stuff.
With no evidence and no corroboration for any of it.
Nothing.
This whole Russia's going to invade Ukraine narrative has been, we all know, because we're all intelligent, grown-up human beings. We
Which
know.
is why, actually, Roger, you mentioned the German officer. It's
Yeah.
actually the anniversary, I think, 1942 of Casablanca coming out. And it is something of that, isn't it? This feeling of what's happening over Ukraine. But the idea that somehow Biden is going to be Bogart is absurd. You know, there is no way at all. And I fear your local congressman or woman that you write to is going to suddenly go, yeah, of course, doing this to Julian Assange will destroy us all. They're not going to think that.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's all, you mentioned Casablanca, these assurances that the State Department has given, or the lawyers at DOJ have given to Julian's lawyers and to the court, that when he comes back here, he'll be treated fairly. He'll be in a nice, housing area in the prison and all of that. Those assurances remind me of General Strasser's assurances to General Renault that when Victor Laszlo returns to Berlin, he'll be treated real nicely and won't have to worry about the conditions. That's what those assurances, I mean, they're worthless. You agree with that, Marion, that these assurances, all the whatever the babble to the court, the high court, is really not worth the paper that it's written on?
Unmute.
Are you muted?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'll ask.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes,
So
yes.
I certainly agree that those assurances are not to be believed. But what I don't agree with is some of the cynicism that has been expressed over the last few minutes. We all know why all this has happened. There have been decades of propaganda. We all know that for decades there has been this removal of any conversation about ethics or morality from anything that has to do with the government or the military. We know why this all happened. We know that journalists have been acting like stenographers. It's not the people's fault. I mean, people have been groomed for this. Just like when we talk about someone who molests people sexually, and we talk about how the girls have been groomed. Well, the public has been groomed to be this distracted. The public has been groomed to be this complacent. The public has been groomed to be this confused. But I feel this very almost like motherly, this is not going to happen. And I think at this point, we have to watch the quality of our own personhood. We have to refuse to give in to a certain level of acquiescence. Well, it's all going to go to hell. You know, we're all going to be killed in nuclear war, or there's not going to be any First Amendment rights, and the rights of the press are all over. You know, we can't afford to do this because we have to be inspiring whoever is left.
To do that. We
No,
can't afford not to
excuse
do
me,
it.
Roger. I've been on many of these shows with you. You
You're
know
calling
that
me
I'm
a
out there.
cynic.
I'm out
You're
there
not a
as,
cynic.
excuse me, I am out there
You're a
as much as you.
politician.
Oh,
It's
that's
coming
really
out.
sad to
Come
hear
on,
you say
guys.
that.
Let's have
That's really sad to hear you say that. And as a woman, as everything, that's low of you.
Oh,
And I would say this, and right now I'm not running for any office. I am out there just as much as you are, Roger. I'm out there for Donziger. I'm out there for Assange. I'm out there on the same things as you are. But as much as we have to make a sober and mature analysis of what is wrong, I think we have to keep reminding people, as you are, as you do, as all of us do, what is still possible and what still remains. And that, I think, is important. And to me, and I think we have to be careful of that. And also we have to be careful not to throw out the insults that you just threw out at me. I don't, yes, thank you. I
Wait a
accept
second.
that.
Wait a
I'm
second.
sorry, but
When
you
you
have
put
been
the
involved
fire
in
out
not
on this
deserve that.
thing,
and you carry the stigma of being a politician with you. That
Excuse
you have to
me?
be careful.
I
No.
don't think it was.
I'm not
You
taking
do.
that on.
We don't
I'm not
understand.
accepting
Wait
that.
a second.
Mm-mm.
I think it's a
Mm-mm. I'm
I
out there as much as you
I
are,
don't
Roger.
consider you a
Unreservedly.
politician. I've run for office 3 times, and mine was strictly, I run for governor, senator, against Schumer, and for mayor. I ran in every Democratic primary. And the reason why I did that was it was basically performance art to try to move the stick, try to get some issues raised. And I think, wasn't that your purpose when you ran in 2020? Or did you actually think that you could possibly win that nomination? Was it to push issues?
The issue is radical truth telling. When I was running for president, I was doing exactly what I'm doing now, using whatever platform any of us can use to try to tell the truth as we understand it at a time when the world is so filled with lies. And the last thing we need to be doing is criticizing and demeaning and insulting other people who are trying to do the same.
Well, that's why I was making the point, because you seem to be suggesting that there was something cynical about Dan Ellsberg or myself, and Dan particularly, because you were taking issue with him bringing up ICBMs and the imminent catastrophe of nuclear warfare.
Roger,
and saying we shouldn't get
okay, excuse me.
either cynical
No one has used her career to celebrate Daniel Ellsberg more than I have. No one has learned more from Daniel Ellsberg to the best of my ability as I have. No one did you run for president talking about the B-21 Raiders? Did you run for president of the United States talking about 7,000 nuclear?
ICBMs in this conversation then.
Wait, could I?
Yeah,
All right,
Daniel, I need you here. Daniel, I need you here. Daniel is chivalrous, even though you're not. Daniel, help me a little here.
This has become the McLaughlin group. Let's get away from that. Go ahead, Daniel. Try to put the fire out.
Mary Ann has pointed to where I let myself open in what I said to misinterpretation. And it is, people do hear me or warn me at sometimes, you're going to discourage people if you talk this way. The truth is, I'm absolutely on the point. It is not impossible. It is possible. No one can prove that these things are inevitable. And in fact, they aren't. As a matter of fact, I found a new formula in a way from Greta Thunberg and others. My hope is that my expectations are utterly wrong. And actually, when I say expectations, they are not expectations of certainty. I always know, even when I feel certain, that I've been wrong. So if I say, I hope my fears about this and my concerns prove that something doesn't work out that way, that won't be a new event. That's a pretty good basis for hope. It's happened a lot. Now, look, I go back, okay, I'm 90, and actually you people are probably old enough to remember this. Actually, sometimes I talk, though, to younger people who weren't even born then. In 1980, 42 years ago, in 1980, let's say in 1984, what would people have said was the probability that the Berlin Wall would be down in 1989?
Exactly.
Now, that was not unlikely. That was impossible. It was impossible. It wouldn't have occur to anybody as a question even. And if it did, impossible. How about Nelson Mandela coming without a violent revolution to power with all its limitations, but to power in South Africa? Impossible. Tony Lewis said that in a column, and said it's impossible. No, it wasn't, it turned out. And lots of other things. I could even say that for another reason, in 1973, January 1973, if you can remember that, Nixon's second term after a landslide saw Nixon out of office in 1974. Right. Who? Impossible.
Exactly.
And I was in a particular crime. I was on my trial. It was during my trial. It was a year after the Pentagon Papers had come out to no apparent effect. Heavy bombing. And for me, for Nixon to be in office till 77, meant the war was going to go on till 77 because he was going to bring the bombing back. That's what I believed, and I was right, actually, though the public didn't have any concept of that. So I saw the war going on. Certainly, no way, I couldn't see anyway. So when I come back to John, too, and your son, John, who I love, actually. I'm a friend of Julian. And as I told you in our house here, I feel love for Julian. And when I say that I don't expect the ICBMs to go away, when I say that the government wants him now second best to getting him to the U.S. and demolishing the First Amendment, second best is to have him die in prison. And that's what they are doing. That's what's happening. Stroke in October, he's still there and so forth. That relieves them of the controversy of a trial, which they would be likely to win, but who needs it? They don't want to have people testifying as to whether that really was collateral murder that he revealed, as it was. As I knew when that came out, people said, oh, that's an inflammatory title that he gave to it. You know, it's a collateral incident or something. I said, no, I am a trained troop leader. I was a battalion training officer. I was a company commander, and I taught people the laws of war, not very much, but we spent some time on it, enough to know that what we were witnessing in that film we just saw was murder. Yeah, not all killing in war is murder, I would say. I'm not a total pacifist, it so happens, but a lot of it is, if not most of it, and that was murder, and that's what he correctly named it. Did it result in any one of those people getting brought up for any kind of account? No. Who was brought up to account for the entire torture program, which is as illegal as anything can be? And Obama was subject to it, could be convicted of that. One person, John Kiriakou, who revealed the name of a torturer. So he went 30 months in prison. Nobody involved in the torture. Right now, they said we won't put Julian in a highest security prison. Well, I just talked on the phone to Daniel Hale, who is in prison right now for revealing murder, an assassination program by the drone program. In other words, instead of a helicopter shooting down those citizens, you have a Hellfire missile from a drone directed thousands of miles away by somebody in Texas. So Hale reveals that for every targeted person, which is already an assassination, no due process, 17 others untargeted are also killed. So you have a serial murder. For that, he's in prison right now. And where is he? In Marion, Illinois. Well, I said, Marion? You're in prison in Marion? That started the Supermax prison. It was the model for the Supermax prisons. He said, well, now they have 3 other ones and they've reduced things in Marion and it isn't as bad as it used to be. So if they promised they wouldn't put Julian in, let's say, the AMX somewhere or one of the 2 or 3 Supermax, he could still have the worst conditions possible. So in short, well, I've said enough.
All right. Well, that was
I do want to say possible. Yes.
But I
That's
think
why we're at it, Marianne. You're right. It is.
All right,
it has to be said, and I should always remember
John.
to say it. I'm talking about.
And
what
you
we
normally-
can do.
Yes, and there were
Right.
times when the abolitionists had no reason to think that they would ever be able to abolish slavery, and women who were in the suffragette movement had no reason, logically, to think that they would be able to gain women's suffrage. And there were times during the civil rights movement when they had no reason to expect that segregation would be dismantled. And I think it's important that
Right.
while they of course, they had to name the evils of slavery. They had to name the evils of segregation. They had to name and inform the evils of the institutionalized suppression of women. But it is important to remind ourselves that historically there is proof of the fact that while the arc of the moral universe is long, it does bend towards justice. And we're simply the latest in the iteration within American history. This dichotomy between the highest principles, such as freedom of the press, and violent transgression against them, which was with us at the very beginning. It's baked into the cake. 41 signers of the Declaration of Independence were themselves slave owners. This polarity between the highest and the lowest has always been with us. We are just the latest generation to have to live it out. And some generations have pushed back more, some generations have pushed back less. Let's just not be the first generation to wimp out on doing what it takes. So of course we're naming what is wrong, but I think that we have plenty of historical precedent for generations embodied by you, Daniel Ellsberg, who ultimately paved the way for the miracle that was necessary. And I believe that we'll have that too.
Yeah, well, Thomas Paine also almost went to jail and had to leave the country, and he was not one of the signers of those papers, the Declaration of Independence, none of it, because they really didn't follow in his path, and it really was a pact with the devil, with the slavery, and then you had the I mean, that's
no, not all the signers were slave owners.
Well, I know Benjamin Franklin wasn't. There were a few that weren't, but that's for a different day. And a lot of abolitionists lost their lives. There were people like Elijah Lovejoy, David Walker, who gave up their lives, and many others that nearly died.
Absolutely.
But I got to get back to John, because John has been cut out of this conversation, and he may be the most important figure here. He's the father of Julian Assange. John, you've heard all of this conversation. Some of it, like little bellicose with each other, but it's okay. That doesn't deter you from going on. And I don't think there's anything unhealthy about having these kinds of conversations, even if we disagree with each other.
A little bit of vigor doesn't hurt. No, I'm okay with that. I don't mean to carry the conversation towards, the best of all possible worlds sort of thing. But in the Greek parliament, there are 300 members of parliament. There are 90 in the Assange group. In the Brazilian parliament, there are 100 in the Assange group. In the Chilean parliament, an Assange group of 30. In the Argentinian parliament. In the French parliament, the deputies, 40. In the UK parliament, 25. In the Australian parliament, 28. In the Norwegian parliament, 9. In the Swedish parliament, 2. In the Bundestag, the German parliament, there are 26. All supporters of Assange. At any given time in Germany, in 29 cities, they have vigils for Assange. So what we here, although I see that we're all gathered from all over the world, we represent, and they fight, of course, we represent about 80 websites and Facebook pages that each of those generates a vigil or a protest outside the UK embassy or the UK consulate. So we represent a upwelling of concern, which really, to analyze where it comes from, I have no idea. So I say it is a historical phenomenon. It even goes against the fact that Julian's suffered unscrupulous lies and scandal by newspapers for 13 years. So what generates it, I don't know, but it is there and it is moving and it is causing doubt and concern in those who exercise power for a number of reasons. One is, of course, the first, Julian Assange's persecution, and the second is that they look shabby, they look unreliable, so they have to become excessive, like Prime Minister Boris Johnson. They become excessive drama and theatre becomes their way of running their country because they instinctively know that their power is weakening. So they raise the level of threat and concern to a fever pitch. However, what causes that is still there, and those changes, if you take Julian Assange as an example, and all of those that information I rattled off, and I've forgotten quite a few countries that have the Assange group. There's even 2 in Japan. If we take that as a barometer of the beginning of a change, and that Julian's fight gives us the foundation to continue. I don't mean to sort of say, oh, you know, you've suffered for us. I don't mean a Christ figure. It allows a focus for us to pursue the justice that we can expect our institutions to deliver to us daily, monthly, yearly. We expect that, we demand it. And as a consequence of that, a support for Julian Assange has grown up in every Western democracy. And well, in Bangladesh, they're very enthusiastic about supporting Julian. If I go to the Middle East, I'm embraced everywhere for the support with affection and warmth and hospitality. So it is there, but and I imagine that the skills of those administrators who are using fear to distract us, I imagine those skills will turn and solve this problem in a way that in one of their deals that they're always conjuring up to maintain the threads of authority. The threads of authority. If I could just give you an example, Baku is as you know, is in Azerbaijan. When the USSR broke up, all of the male population roamed the streets destroying something, and that was just in one city in the USSR. Dozens of them had the same phenomenon. When the lines of authority break down, for some reason or other, human beings act in the most strange and extraordinary and violent ways. And those in power know this phenomenon, utilize it for their own ends, but at the same time have to maintain authority so that things are continually orderly. But that will be their understanding, instinctive understanding of that the streams of authority must be maintained, will effect the end of the persecution of Julian, because they look so bloody shabby now.
Yes. Roger, I very well said, and this has been a very lively discussion, and informative. Roger, there are 2 things I want to ask you. One, your fellow people in your industry, those in show business, entertainment, music, actors or whatever, there's a dearth of those coming out and have been for the last 20 years for Julian Assange, last 10 years. And how you feel about your contemporaries there and your government. I mean, you live in the US, but you are a British citizen. So give us your take on your contemporaries in the business and the government that's giving you the business in the UK.
Thanks, Randy.
You like that question, didn't you?
Yeah, the poison chalice. No, all right, here, quick. Let's deal with the UK government. The UK government is a poodle. I'm not interested in it. Boris Johnson's a joke. He's like an old Etonian, and he's the Prime Minister of England. Why? I've no idea. And that's all I have to say about the government. I'm sorry, but I'm just not interested. It's complete. What I am interested in is John Shipton's extremely moving sharing with the rest of us of the numbers of people, both in parliaments and government bodies and assemblies, so on across, and ordinary people all across the world, even in their 3s and 4s and 1s and 2s or 100s or 300s of sharing with the father of our great hero, Julian Assange, their empathy and their support and their whatever, because it is fundamentally extremely moving. If one person embraces you, your day changes. I think we can all agree with that. So the fact that you meet 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 people who all show that A, they're intelligent enough to understand the conversation, but B, they're humane enough and have enough love in their hearts to sympathize with your son who's banged up in a high security prison. Something that none of us, well, maybe some, I haven't been to prison. I can't even begin to imagine what it's like to be in solitary confinement for 4 hours, never mind a day or 4 days or but 3 years. I cannot imagine what it must be like. It was a bit like many years ago, before he was released from Guantanamo. Shaka Amar was on a hunger strike in Guantanamo, and those trying to organize support for him were asking people to not eat or drink anything for 24 hours, right? So I did. Oh my goodness me. I think about that, and I did, and I thought, oh my God, this is one day. And I think about that almost every day about Julian. I think, how would you be able to take it? I'm not sure that I would. In fact, I'm sure I wouldn't. I don't think it's possible to imagine how disgusting it is, particularly if you're Joseph K. and you know you didn't commit any crime. You know you haven't done anything wrong. You know you're an innocent man, and yet here you are, subject to this appalling, errant authority of these people. So, all right, I'll stop again now. And again, I want to apologize to Marianne Williamson again for accusing her of being a politician. I apologize.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you.
Over the trouble.
I appreciate that.
All right,
Okay,
that's great.
thanks.
Listen, you're right. What you said about what John Shipton said about all those stuff was very, very moving. And but we got just 10 minutes left here. I want to go to Afshin, and then Afshin, since Roger wouldn't slam the British government, like take the time.
Call it a poodle. It's a poodle. It's
I know, but
irrelevant.
I
It's a
want
joke.
something. Go in with a little more depth, Ashton, about the UK's complicity in this, attempt to murder Julian Assange.
Oh,
But turn your microphone on first, if you could, Afshin, and then I'll ask you the question again. Could you expound?
I can hear you perfectly. I know you guys have spoken about it on your show, Randy, and Roger's spoken about it. Lots of accusations and allegations about corruption within the judicial system and the intelligence services and the judges and the judicial system. I have to say, in the past few days, Joe Biden's weapons and Boris Johnson's weapons have been dropping on Yemen, threatening 20 million odd people, the world's worst humanitarian crisis in Yemen. How we would wish Julian Assange's counsel, as all the horror has been unleashed this week around the world by these weapons. Just before I run off, because of the Yemen stuff, the fact Boris Johnson may be thrown out of power by a small coterie within his own elite, the way our democracy works, I suppose just to say that is this legal route actually working at all? When Nelson Mandela obviously was being done for blowing up restaurants in the anti-apartheid movement, they didn't really accept any idea of the court system in apartheid South Africa. So one has to wonder whether this legal route here in Britain, whether we have justice of any kind. I mean, we've already gone through with Daniel Hale and Kiriakou and Sterling and all those different American whistleblowers that have been incarcerated. Should the Assange WikiLeaks team be cooperating with this system, with its close ties to British intelligence, US intelligence, and the authorities at all? Is this a waste of time?
Right. All right, Marianne, I'm going to give you the last word here. Then we're going to go out with, we're going to give you the last word here, and then everybody can, say goodbye to each other.
The last word from me is that Stella Morris came out of the courtroom today and said this was a win. The last word from me is that what we're doing here is being repeated all over the world. People are having conversations, both public and private, that everybody listening, please write your congressman, please write your senators, please use your own social media platform, please use whatever platforms you have, please talk to your friends about it, please don't shut up, and please make it very clear to everybody that everybody is really clear. This is a wrong, and Joe Biden could end it tonight. In fact, Joe Biden at this point is the wrongdoer to be even trying to prosecute Julian Assange. And we as citizens, certainly of the United States, but citizens of the world, have every reason and every right to stand up, to refuse to shut up. And I hope that all of us can remember that none of us are alone. We're not alone. There are millions of people all over the world who are standing not only for Julian Assange, but for all of these issues and all of these people who are being so wronged by a system that is dying, that is in decline. There is a new world that's struggling to be born. None of us are doing this by ourselves. We're all in this together. And I think the final word should be, we'll get there. And Julian will get there. And may that be so.
Well, that was quick. Now I have an extra minute. I'll let Daniel. Anybody want to take that extra minute and put a cherry on it? Daniel, can we do it in 1 minute? Here.
You've heard enough of me. No, that was very well said, Marion. And I can't bring myself to say on any of these issues, we will do it. It will happen. You say that, and that's inspiring to people, and you mean it, and you know it. At my age, I can't bring myself to say that. But I do know everything is at stake. Everything is at stake, as Roger put it absolutely rightly. And so is it worth enlarging that possibility? It is a real possibility, whatever it is, that we can change the psychology, the motives, the empathy, the way the world works. It is possible. It's not impossible. Is it worth risking one's life or spending a life in prison like Julian? Is it worth it to try to bring about that weather world with so little, perhaps a little chance? Of course it is. Absolutely. So Julian did the right thing, even for the price he's paying. How can I say that to John here, his father? Well, I don't know if he would agree or disagree, but I'll bet Julian would agree. Julian, I believe, does not, and I cannot believe that he regrets doing what he did in 2010, for which he's charged right now, and he's right to feel that way because it was the right thing to do.
That's the second last word. That's thank you very much, Daniel Ellsberg. He's got a few books out. You can catch him all over you're pretty active, Daniel, and I really appreciate it. You really have boundless energy. Afshin Rattansi going underground Monday, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. As George Galloway said, the best show, period, on television, and I concur. It really is great, and I know you've done it, Roger, many times. And Marion, you should do the show.
If I'm invited, I'd be honored.
Absolutely, anytime.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank
John,
you.
you've done the show. John, I guess anybody else want to say, although Marion, you had the last word, anybody else have a burning desire to get one last word in?
Oh, no, I just want to say thanks to everybody, and we crack on. We just crack on. That's what we do.
Raj?
John, could I ask, I raised a really terrible question there and you know the answer. Am I right in saying that I do not believe that with the terrible price he's paid, and not just the last 3 years, I saw him twice in the Ecuadorian embassy, and the difference between the first time and the second time was very appalling to me. That was before all of this isolation. That was just being kept out of the sunlight for 7 years. That's all, and going in that. And so, even with that price, which I didn't have to pay, by a kind of miracle, by the way, the idea that I didn't get put away was itself a really rather a miracle. Others all paid a price. Chelsea Manning, Daniel Hale, and the others, but they all paid a bigger price, starting with Mordecai Vanunu, 17 years in prison for revealing the Israeli nuclear program, 11 and a half years in solitary confinement. 6
And
months
still not allowed to talk to the press.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you want to answer that?
So they paid a heavier price, but the price can be worth it, because a war's worth of lives, a civilization's worth of lives is at stake. Not just can be at stake, is at stake. It's all at stake now. So nothing that you and I and everybody here are doing is too much or too soon. It can't be.
All right, John, you got you heard what he just said. Daniel said that.
If I'm wrong, tell me. If I'm wrong, tell me.
All right. I don't know. I don't know if he can hear.
What was the question?
The question was.
The question is, did your son have any regret about releasing collateral damage in the cable gate and all of that?
I don't. I have no access into Julian's mind, but I know that he's sensible enough not to add a frisson of self-torture to the torture he's already undergoing. I mean, it would be absolutely anyway. It would end me if I thought that Julian walked up and down his cell hour after hour saying, "I shouldn't have done it."
Yeah.
I mean, what a horrifying prospect that would be, to spend the 13 years regretting that you've spent 13 years. I mean, it's just horrible thought.
Roger, you get the last word right now. Then I'm going to play
Thank you,
some
Julian.
uplifting music.
Julian, we know you did the right thing. Absolutely the right thing. There's no question about it. All 6 people on this screen in front of me, I know, I don't know you all personally, but I know enough about you all to know that you, all of you, always, in every moment, try the hardest you can to do the right thing. And that's all any of us can expect of our brothers and sisters anywhere in the world. And so let's hope that this choir, grows exponentially with all the people John Shipton was talking about who come up to him and hug him because of their concern for his son and his incarceration. And we will overcome. We will. I feel confident of that. So I'm with you, Marion, on that, with that note of optimism.
Well, I'm going to play something to take us out. Thank you, Marion. Thank you, John. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you for doing this.
Daniel, and thank you, Roger. This is the year you were born, Daniel. The very year you were born. This musical came out called Gold Diggers at 33, and it's got the greatest ending.
Born at 31. But anyway, I was 2. I missed it, though, actually.
Gold Diggers at 33. All right, so it was. It's great. This is Joan Blondell and Etta Mutin. It's an anti-war tune, and these are protests against the First World War I or World War I veterans and how they got screwed. And it's called My Forgotten Man. Joan Blondell, Remember My Forgotten Man, and Etta Mutin. So we're going to go out with that. Stick around, watch it, and we're really going to say goodbye. Roger, you didn't see this the last time, but this is really beautiful.
Remember my forgotten man? You put a rifle in his hand. You sent him far away. You shouted, hip hooray! But look at him today. Remember my forgotten man. You had him cultivate the land. He walked behind a plow. The sweat fell from his brow. But look at him right now. And once he used to love me. I was happy then. He used to take care of me. Won't you bring him back again? 'Cause ever since the world began, a woman's got to have a man. Forgetting him, you see, means you're forgetting me. Like my forgotten man.
Remember my forgotten man. You put a rifle in his hand. You sent him far away. You shouted hip hooray. But look at him today. forgotten man. You had him cultivate the land. He walked behind the plow, the sweat fell from his brow. But look at him right now. And once he used to love me, I was happy then. He used to take care of me. Won't you bring him back again? 'Cause ever since the world began, a woman's got to have a man. Forgetting him, you see, means you're forgetting me, like my forgotten man.
All right.
Wow.